Hello and welcome back to NoBS. Today we turn to talking about these terrible demonstrators that are getting rather rambunctious out here in America. And in addition, they're starting to spread to other parts of the world too. You see these demonstrators and these far left activists, usually tied to the groups Antifa and BLM, they've also gotten leaks over to Europe and London and other countries are getting involved. Australia has a presence. And in addition, they're starting to look to other countries and point blame and start to sort of attack them. That's what I wanted to bring up today. I found an interesting article from the BBC News. Now, this is a British publication funded by their government, and they push lots of far left stuff like we're talking about today. Specifically, they seem to be supporting BLM, which is this American-based political group. They're admitted Marxists too, so they're basically international Marxists trying to spread this kind of bad communist-fueled ideology all over the world. And now we have a British newspaper spreading that, and specifically they're spreading them calling a significant country racist. That's right. Today, Japan is coming under attack for its supposed racism, and this isn't the first time I've heard about this. Many people like to call out Japan recently, calling them racist, saying that they're offensive for not having enough immigration and minority influence and stuff like that. They're going after Japan over and over for a couple years now. I've encountered this multiple times before, and that's why I wanted to finally talk about it today in relation with current events and basically just mount a defense for Japan. Japan is a good, respectable country. Ever since we defeated them in World War II, they've been recovering and doing a lot of good, better things. Their country has become successful. They've produced lots of great technology, video games, companies like Sony, things like that. I mean, definitely not perfect, definitely not the best. There's, I'm sure, issues with them, and they could probably do better with things like we're going to talk about today. Like they might be considered offensive by very soft PC sensibilities, but I'm here to tell you they're really not that bad. They're actually a decent country who gets accused of this stuff just for trying to defend themselves, just for trying to, remain autonomous and stay successful. And they're an island nation doing what they can to survive in this very biased, very unfair world. So we're going to talk about that soon. We're going to talk more about this story and get right into this article. Here's the one in question from the BBC News. It says, Black Lives Matter pushes Japan to confront racism. Straight up. Then you got a BLM person and a seemingly Japanese woman with them trying to show that they're together. And then this says Japan traditionally sees itself as a very homogenous society. Yeah, that's the problem. Like I said, it comes from Japan just sort of being for Japan, them being this kind of pro-Japan place that has very minimal immigration. They're more focused on protecting their own people and doing well for their own society. And I think that could be respectful. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily the best choice for everyone. America has its own immigration issues, and we have a lot more immigration. And I'm not necessarily here to say that's a big problem either. We can have different levels of immigration and have different disagreements. But the point is, each country has their own right to make decisions for themselves. And trying to force them to take more immigrants is super wrong and super lame and just nosy and bossy too. I don't like to see this, so that's why we're talking about it now. To many Japanese, racism towards Black people has long been considered something that happens in the US or Europe, not at home. But when the death of George Floyd in the US sparked a wave of protest demanding that Black Lives Matter, people in Japan joined in too. The protests and marches in major cities pushed a debate about racism in the country and whether enough was being done to confront and change things. In June, public broadcaster NHK aired a segment to Japanese audiences what was happening in the U.S. with the protests over George Floyd's death. The report, in a news show aimed at younger audiences, featured an animated video depicting the protesters as grotesque stereotypes, deeply steeped in racist imagery, characters with exaggerated muscles and angry faces, and with looters in the background. The reaction was largely negative. The U.S. Embassy called the segment offensive and insensitive. I'm sorry, we do not accept your lame excuses anymore. You claim ignorance about the blackness, and yet you feel empowered to make offensive racist commentary on black issues without consulting anyone. If you need help, we are here, but this is BS. And I believe this is an image of the riots and the protests. And this is what they call racist now, I guess. This is a pretty tame to me. It's just a black dude with some muscles I could see why they could think this is a negative on them a little bit, but it's really just a cartoon version of the protest. It's a bunch of minorities in the streets and they're angry and they're yelling. I mean, that's pretty much what's been happening. I don't see the issue. I don't see the racism here. I don't see it even being like against them. It's just an animation version. And it's really absurd that this is a story. This is a problem. And it just reminds me, what I see right now is this actually reminds me a lot of the characterizations they've done of Floyd. Floyd has been animated and drawn on walls, put up on murals and stuff like that. And I thought he looked pretty exaggerated too. I don't think this is exactly him. It's just a random black dude in the cartoon here, but it's really not far off from the actual supposedly respectful animations of Floyd we've already seen. And in addition, let's just keep in mind, this is a bad thing to protest. George Floyd was a terrible criminal who had many arrests, many things on his record. He was doing horrible things that day when this arrest went wrong. He was on many narcotics, resisting, acting a little crazy, lying, terrorizing the cops and the people around him. He was trying to drive a vehicle intoxicated. You know, he was a bad role model. I don't see why everyone wants to support it. So I could also see why a parody could be justified of something like that. Like, this is right for parody. But the problem is BLM has too big of a stronghold on modern culture and things in the public. That's why the BBC is trying to mount a defense here. And it's why other things have happened recently too. Like, for example, this reminds me of that video game, Tom Clancy Elite Squad had a kind of allusion to BLM. They had this terrorist group within their game that used a similar symbol. And since that struck too close to home, people were outraged by it and they forced the company to remove it. And I think that's, you know, a similar kind of thing that's going on here. Anything that slightly might make BLM look negative, they're getting attacked and called racist and offensive, but it's really not there. I mean, there's nothing racist about that cartoon. It was just containing black people. There was nothing racist or offensive about that elite squad allusion to possibly allude to BLM with that symbol. I think that video game actually was spot on, and they just described BLM too accurately, and that's why people got triggered, and I think that's why they're getting triggered in this story too. One particularly vocal critic was Bay McNeil, an African-American teacher, author, columnist, and longtime Japan resident. He tweeted that it was an offensive racist commentary, and it was time for Japan to stop lame excuses on handling of black issues. NHK later apologized, and following the widespread attention Mr. McNeil articles received, invited him to discuss the problem. He soon found himself giving a talk to the entire NHK staff, which he said was an extremely interesting experience. There were a lot of great questions that showed that a lot of people did not know there were problems with blackface or whitewashing. It was really important that someone came in and was able to explain it. So this sounds really cringe to me, like some black person going around Japan telling people how to act, telling them how to supposedly, not be racist, and then talking about blackwashing, whitewashing. I mean, blackface, it has nothing to do with that. This is just an animation that features black people. This is not offensive. This is not blackface. This is not this kind of crazy leap in logic that they're taking. They're going too far, and it's really kind of infecting Japan, who didn't deserve it. I mean, they don't even have a significant population of these people here. And then they see one or two, and they're kind of like, I think they're scared, honestly. It seems like a lot of people would be scared. And that's a very, very natural reaction to this terrorism that BLM has caused across our country. America is up in flames. The major cities run by Democrats, of course, these Biden supporters that are part of BLM, they're destroying the cities, and they're saying, hey, if you even try to arrest a black criminal, you're going to get your city burned down. Like, you can't even arrest a criminal if they're black. It's that ridiculous right now. And that's how you scare people. That's called terrorism. When you use violence and fear to get your political motives accomplished, that's terrorism. And that's what's happening now in Japan. That's what's happened in America. These riots in America have scared other countries. So the Japanese are like, all right, we better listen to this black person or they're going to burn our city down. And I think that's a really, really bad and scary place to be, especially in a modern, learned, advanced society like what we live in. Mr. McNeil has both praise and criticism for the country he has lived in for 16 years. He says that in his immediate surrounding of friends and students, people have been very welcoming and open, and often curious and receptive to learn about his outside view on the Japanese experience. At the same time, he points to a level of everyday, casual racism he experiences. I'm safer here than in the US, no question, he says. I haven't experienced police brutality like you would in the US, but yet there are paper cuts of racism every day, and those also add up. Being otherized on a daily basis means you still live through some tough stuff. And then there's a picture of this Japanese beauty queen, because I guess she was not Japanese enough for some people. There was like a whole controversy about that. She's obviously mixed or something. That's a whole other story. But let's talk about this McNeil guy. I mean, first of all, casual racism, like paper cuts of tiny little microaggressions, as they sometimes call them. This is nothing. This is like a nothing burger. Like, if that stuff is important to you, if you're getting hurt by these little casual racisms, I mean, you might as well say like the lowest level of racism, anything can become racist at this point. It's just like totally neutering the term. And it's just like, dude, you're not facing racism. You don't automatically experience police brutality in the US if you're a minority. That's ridiculous. I mean, if that was true, all the minorities would be beat up and in jail or something like that. It doesn't happen. People get taken down by the cops because they're committing crimes and resisting arrest and doing very bad things. The cops are trying to help. They're trying to save the rest of the city from these dangerous people. And what's really happening here is these are criminals. They get arrested, they resist, they fight the cops, and then things go south. Obviously, they're basically asking for it. But at the same time, obviously, we don't want anyone to get hurt. I don't want anything to happen to the George Floyds of the world or any of these people. Like, that's not the point. The point is, if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. If you act like a crazy person and fight cops, they're going to have to defend themselves. And it's very likely it's not going to go well for you. Now, that's a very simple thing to solve. All you got to do is not commit a crime in the first place. Or in addition to that, if you do get caught with a crime, you just don't resist arrest. Just surrender, let them handcuff you. They're not going to do anything. Like, none of these cases are random cops just beating up a person. Like, that has not happened ever, at least not in these big cases. I mean, I'm sure it's happened once or twice in the world's history. I'm sure it's even happened a couple times, maybe this year, we don't know about. But if this was a prevalent issue, we would see more examples. But truthfully, all the examples we see are bad examples. They're examples of criminals fighting cops and starting fights. So of course the cops are going to fight back. And it's just really frustrating to keep seeing these misrepresentations. And now they're taking it over to Japan, who seems to have done nothing wrong here. So that's the end of the story. That about wraps it up. And I think you guys get the point. Thanks for watching today's video. Make sure you comment your thoughts on this story, everything you think about it below. We'll have a discussion. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell for notifications, and also hit the like button if you enjoyed what you saw. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next video.